The burden of absurd contradictions. Chapter 1: The Morning Ritual. Marcus Holloway stood before his bathroom mirror at exactly 6:47 a.m., as he had every weekday for the past 8 years, methodically brushing his teeth in precise circular motions. 32 strokes on the upper left quadrant, 32 on the upper right, 32 below left, 32 below right. The ritual was sacred, immutable, necessary, and utterly meaningless. This contradiction struck him with fresh force each morning, like a slap that never lost its sting. He needed the routine to function, yet he understood with crystalline clarity that it served no cosmic purpose. The universe would not collapse if he brushed 31 times instead of 32. His teeth would not crumble. Yet the very thought of deviation filled him with a nausea so profound it threatened to buckle his knees. He spat into the sink and stared at his reflection. 43 years old, graying at the temples, lines etched around his eyes like parentheses containing a joke he'd forgotten. His face was the face of a man who had spent decades accumulating knowledge, credentials, respect, a senior systems analyst at Meridian Industries, holder of 2 degrees, owner of a modest but well-appointed home in the suburbs of Cleveland. By every measurable standard, Marcus Holloway was a success. The absurdity of this assessment nearly made him laugh. Success at what? At navigating an arbitrary set of social and economic constructs that had no more inherent meaning than the mating dance of fruit flies. At accumulating digits in a bank account backed by the collective delusion that numbers on a screen represented value. At maintaining a mortgage on a house he occupied solely because society decreed that shelter required ownership, ownership required debt, and debt required the surrender of one's life in 40-year installments. Marcus walked to his closet and selected a navy suit from among 12 nearly identical alternatives. The suits hung in perfect order, organized by color gradation from darkest to lightest, another ritual that was simultaneously essential and pointless. He dressed with mechanical precision, each movement rehearsed through thousands of repetitions. As he knotted his tie, the familiar weight settled on his shoulders. Not the weight of responsibility or obligation, those were merely symptoms. This was the weight of knowing. Of seeing through the elaborate performance that everyone else seemed to accept without question. Of recognizing that he was trapped in a system of his own making, complicit in perpetuating structures he found fundamentally hollow. The drive to work took exactly 23 minutes, assuming normal traffic patterns. Marcus knew this because he had timed it obsessively, calculating optimal routes, departure times, parking strategies. He listened to NPR, absorbing reports of political maneuvering, economic indicators, social movements, all delivered with the breathless urgency that suggested these events mattered in some profound way. But did they? Wars erupted and ended, politicians rose and fell, markets surged and crashed, and yet the sun continued its nuclear furnace dance exactly as it had for billions of years before humans invented meaning, and would continue long after the last human breath was drawn. The scale of cosmic indifference was so vast that human affairs seemed less significant than the displacement of dust motes in a sunbeam. And yet Marcus cared. Despite his intellectual understanding of meaninglessness, he found himself emotionally invested in outcomes that his rational mind recognized as ultimately trivial. He worried about quarterly reports, felt satisfaction when his code executed cleanly, experienced genuine distress when colleagues criticized his work. The caring and the not caring existed simultaneously in his consciousness, two incompatible truths grinding against each other like tectonic plates. Chapter 2: The Algorithm. Meridian Industries occupied 14 floors of a glass tower that reflected nothing but other glass towers, creating an infinite regression of architectural redundancy. Marcus's cubicle was located on the 7th floor. Positioned with mathematical precision in a grid of identical workspaces populated by individuals who performed variations on the theme of manipulating information. His job involved optimizing data flow algorithms for supply chain management systems. He was exceptionally good at it, possessed of an intuitive understanding of how information wanted to move through digital networks. His solutions were elegant, efficient, praised by supervisors who didn't understand the technical details, but recognized their effectiveness through improved metrics. The irony was exquisite. Marcus spent his days creating order from chaos, imposing logical structures on vast streams of data, yet he lived in a state of perpetual intellectual disorder. He could debug the most complex algorithmic problems with ease, but he couldn't debug his own mind. Morning, Marcus. Jennifer Reeves appeared at the entrance to his cubicle, coffee mug in hand, wearing her standard expression of professional cheerfulness. Jennifer was the team lead, a competent manager who had mastered the art of translating technical work into business-friendly language. She meant well, which somehow made interactions with her more difficult rather than less. Good morning, Jennifer. Marcus swiveled his chair to face her, a motion that required conscious effort. Eye contact. Appropriate facial expression. The social performance that everyone else seemed to execute effortlessly. I wanted to touch base about the Johnson project. The preliminary results look fantastic. Really impressive work. Thank you. The words felt hollow in his mouth. Impressive to whom? By what standard? The Johnson project involved shaving 3% off delivery times for consumer goods that people didn't need, produced by workers who were paid insufficient wages, sold by a company whose primary innovation was convincing customers that they required products that hadn't existed the previous year. But Jennifer's praise wasn't hollow to her. She genuinely believed that their work mattered, that optimization was inherently valuable, that efficiency was a noble goal. Her enthusiasm was authentic, which made Marcus's cynicism feel cruel and misplaced. Who was he to poison her satisfaction with his philosophical neuroses? The client wants to implement across all North American distribution centers, Jennifer continued. We are talking about a significant rollout. This could be career-making stuff. Career-making. The phrase triggered Marcus's internal alarms. Career toward what end? What was the trajectory of a career in corporate optimization? Senior analyst to principal analyst to director to vice president, each promotion bringing more money, more responsibility, more distance from any tangible purpose. He could trace the path with depressing clarity: salary increases, corner office, stock options, retirement planning, death. That's great news, Marcus managed. Jennifer studied his face. You don't seem excited. Here was the trap. Marcus couldn't explain that he found the entire concept of career advancement meaningless without sounding ungrateful, unstable, or arrogant. He couldn't articulate that success in their field felt like winning a contest he hadn't agreed to enter. The gulf between his internal state and socially acceptable responses was unbridgeable. I'm just focused on making sure the implementation goes smoothly, he said. Excitement can wait until we know it works in practice. This seemed to satisfy Jennifer, who nodded approvingly. That's what I like about you, Marcus. Always thinking ahead. She departed, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and Marcus's growing sense of displacement. He turned back to his monitor, where lines of code waited with infinite patience. Code was honest, at least. It did exactly what you told it to do, no more and no less. There was no pretense, no hidden agenda, no social subterfuge. Variables held values, functions returned results, loops executed until conditions were met. The digital realm operated according to pure logic, unlike the analog world of human interaction, where nothing meant exactly what it appeared to mean. Marcus lost himself in the work, finding temporary relief in the clarity of computational problems. For several hours, he achieved something approaching peace, his consciousness fully absorbed in the elegant dance of data structures and algorithmic efficiency. This was why he'd chosen programming initially, the promise of a world where problems had definitive solutions, where truth was binary, where complexity could be managed through systematic decomposition. But even this refuge was contaminated by absurdity. The more efficiently his algorithms functioned, the more successfully he contributed to a system he found fundamentally questionable. His technical competence made him complicit in perpetuating structures that felt hollow. Excellence became a form of moral compromise. Chapter 3: The Lunch Conversation. The company cafeteria occupied half of the 15th floor, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city. Marcus usually ate at his desk, but today he felt compelled to venture upstairs, driven by a restlessness he couldn't name. He selected a salad from the abundant options, another performance of health consciousness that was simultaneously genuine and calculated, and found an empty table near the windows. The city spread out below him, a vast grid of streets punctuated by buildings of varying heights, the whole arrangement suggesting order while containing barely controlled chaos. "Mind if I join you?" Marcus looked up to find David Chen, a programmer from the adjacent team. David was younger, perhaps 28, possessed of the easy confidence that seemed to come naturally to people who hadn't yet encountered the full weight of existential questioning. "Of course." Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him. David sat down with his sandwich and chips, the casual lunch of someone who didn't overthink nutritional choices. "Beautiful day," he said, glancing toward the windows. Yes, Marcus agreed, though he wondered what made a day beautiful. The arbitrary arrangement of atmospheric conditions. The angle of sunlight filtering through glass. The collective agreement that certain weather patterns were preferable to others. "I heard about the Johnson project," David continued. "Congratulations. That's huge." "Thank you." Marcus stabbed at his salad, each piece of lettuce an exercise in futile nourishment. "How's the Peterson account going?" "Oh, you know. Same old optimization problems, different client. Sometimes I wonder if we are just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, you know." David laughed as he said this, treating his observation as a casual joke rather than a profound metaphysical statement. The comment hit Marcus like a physical blow. David had inadvertently articulated the exact nature of their predicament, but he'd done so with the casual dismissiveness of someone making small talk. The casual use of such a perfect metaphor for the futility of their efforts was almost unbearable. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though he knew the answer would only deepen his discomfort. David shrugged. "Just that we spend so much time optimizing these systems, making everything more efficient, but sometimes I wonder if the whole enterprise is kind of, I don't know, beside the point. Like, we are helping companies move products faster and cheaper, but does the world really need more fast, cheap products?" Here it was, the cognitive dissonance laid bare by someone who hadn't realized what he'd said. David had identified the fundamental absurdity of their work, but seemed immune to the psychological consequences of this recognition. He could articulate the meaninglessness while remaining functionally untroubled by it. "But you continue doing it," Marcus observed. "Well, yeah. I mean, it's good work. Pays well. And somebody's going to do it, right? Might as well be us." David took a large bite of his sandwich, apparently unburdened by the philosophical implications of his pragmatism. This was perhaps the most maddening aspect of Marcus's condition, the recognition that everyone else seemed capable of holding contradictory ideas without experiencing distress. They could acknowledge meaninglessness while finding meaning, recognize futility while remaining motivated, see through social constructs while participating in them enthusiastically. "Do you ever think about what we are optimizing toward?" Marcus asked. "Like, what's the end goal of all this efficiency?" David paused mid-chew, considering the question with genuine thoughtfulness. "I guess making things work better. Helping businesses succeed. Creating value for shareholders." Each answer was both correct and inadequate. Yes, they were making things work better, but better according to whose definition and toward what ultimate purpose? Yes, they were helping businesses succeed, but success at what and at what cost? Yes, they were creating value for shareholders, but value measured how and justified by what moral framework? "Does that feel meaningful to you?" Marcus pressed. "I mean, meaningful is a pretty big word," David replied with a laugh. "I don't know if I need my job to be meaningful in some cosmic sense. It's interesting, it pays the bills, I work with smart people. That's enough meaning for me. That's enough meaning for me." The phrase echoed in Marcus's head like a mantra he couldn't adopt. How did one simply decide that arbitrary satisfactions constituted sufficient meaning? How did one choose to be satisfied with surface-level purpose when deeper questioning revealed only void? "What about you?" David asked. "Are you one of those guys who needs to feel like you're changing the world?" The question was posed with gentle humor, but it struck at the core of Marcus's dilemma. He wasn't trying to change the world, he'd long ago abandoned such grandiose ambitions. He was simply trying to exist in a world that felt coherent, to find some alignment between his actions and his understanding of reality. The gap between what he did and what he believed to be true had become unbridgeable. "I just think about these things too much," Marcus said finally. "Yeah, that'll drive you crazy," David agreed cheerfully. "Sometimes you just got to go with the flow, you know." Go with the flow. Another impossible directive. The flow led nowhere Marcus wanted to go, carried him further from any sense of authenticity or coherence. But David seemed genuinely content to be carried along, to participate without requiring deeper justification. They finished lunch discussing technical details, safer ground where Marcus could function without confronting philosophical landmines. But the conversation lingered in his mind for the rest of the afternoon, a perfect illustration of his isolation. He was surrounded by people who lived in the same world he did, performed the same tasks, faced the same contradictions, yet they seemed to inhabit a different universe entirely, one where meaning could be modest, where purpose could be pragmatic, where questions didn't necessarily require answers. Chapter 4: The Evening Routine. Marcus's house sat on Maple Street in a subdivision called Brookhaven Estates, though there was no brook and the elevation was entirely flat. The name was pure marketing, designed to evoke pastoral tranquility in a development that had been carved from farmland 15 years earlier. Every house followed one of 4 architectural templates, painted in approved color schemes, landscaped according to homeowners association guidelines. He parked in his two-car garage, the second bay occupied by storage bins containing items he rarely accessed, but couldn't bring himself to discard. Christmas decorations, college textbooks, exercise equipment purchased with good intentions and abandoned when enthusiasm faded. The archaeology of his adult life, accumulated objects testifying to various phases of attempted meaning-making. The house itself was a testament to successful performance of middle-class expectations. 3 bedrooms, 1 converted to a home office, the third serving as a guest room that hosted visitors perhaps twice a year, 2.5 bathrooms, a kitchen equipped with appliances he used primarily for reheating takeout, a living room furnished with tasteful pieces selected more for their appropriateness than their personal significance. Marcus had purchased the house 5 years earlier. During a brief period when he'd convinced himself that ownership might provide the sense of rootedness he lacked. The mortgage application process had been straightforward, his credit score and income qualifying him easily for the loan. He'd signed papers committing to 30 years of payments, binding his future to an institution that existed primarily as an abstract legal entity. The absurdity of the arrangement became clear within months of moving in. He was now responsible for maintaining a structure that was fundamentally identical to hundreds of others, in service of an investment that was primarily theoretical. The house's value existed only as a consensus hallucination, numbers that fluctuated based on market conditions entirely beyond his control. He paid property taxes to a municipality whose services he rarely used, homeowners association fees to maintain standards he hadn't helped establish, insurance premiums to protect against disasters he couldn't prevent. Yet he needed shelter, and this particular form of shelter was considered normal, even desirable. The alternative arrangements, renting, communal living, nomadic existence, were either economically inefficient or socially unacceptable. He was trapped not by malicious design, but by the accumulated logic of systems that nobody had consciously chosen. Marcus changed from his work clothes into jeans and a t-shirt, another ritual transition that marked the boundary between professional performance and private existence. But the boundary was illusory, there was no authentic self waiting beneath the corporate costume. He was the same person, equally displaced in both contexts. He opened his laptop and began his evening routine of news consumption, cycling through websites that delivered carefully curated information about the day's events. Political developments, economic indicators, social movements, international conflicts, an endless stream of occurrences that was simultaneously urgent and irrelevant. The urgency was manufactured, Marcus understood. News organizations had discovered that anxiety was profitable, that fear and outrage generated more engagement than information or understanding. They had perfected the art of making distant events feel personally threatening, of transforming minor developments into existential crises. The result was a population in a constant state of low-level panic about problems they couldn't solve and events they couldn't influence. Yet Marcus consumed this information compulsively, driven by the fear that ignorance might be worse than anxiety. What if something truly important occurred and he missed it? What if his lack of awareness left him unprepared for some crucial development? The possibility of missing vital information felt more threatening than the certainty of consuming useless information. He clicked through articles about congressional hearings, trade negotiations, celebrity scandals, climate studies, technological innovations, each story crafted to suggest profound significance while delivering little actual insight. The cumulative effect was a sense of being overwhelmed by the world's complexity while remaining fundamentally ignorant about its actual nature. Marcus closed the laptop and walked to his kitchen, where he confronted the evening's central question: what to eat. His refrigerator contained various ingredients in states of freshness, but the effort required to combine them into a meal felt disproportionate to the temporary satisfaction such a meal would provide. He ordered Thai food from his phone, a transaction that would result in someone driving across town to deliver sustenance he could have prepared himself with minimal effort. The inefficiency was staggering. Raw materials had been grown by farmers, processed by manufacturers, shipped to distributors, sold to restaurants, prepared by cooks, and would now be delivered by drivers. Also, Marcus could consume nutrients without engaging in the basic human activity of food preparation. The supply chain represented a triumph of specialization and commerce, and also a symbol of how disconnected he'd become from fundamental life processes. While waiting for delivery, Marcus sat in his living room and tried to read. His bookshelf contained accumulated volumes from various phases of his intellectual development: philosophy texts from college, business books from his career-building period, novels purchased with the intention of cultural enrichment. Most remained partially read, abandoned when their promised insights failed to materialize or when their demands exceeded his available attention. He selected a novel at random, something about a man searching for meaning in post-war Europe, and managed 3 pages before the irony overwhelmed him. He was reading about a character experiencing existential displacement while experiencing existential displacement himself. The recursive nature of the activity made concentration impossible. The doorbell rang, and Marcus exchanged money for food with a delivery driver who seemed approximately 20 years old. The young man was polite, efficient, apparently unburdened by questions about the cosmic significance of conveying sustenance between strangers for small financial gain. Marcus envied his apparent simplicity. He ate while watching a streaming service, scrolling through hundreds of entertainment options before settling on a documentary about ocean exploration. The footage was beautiful, vast underwater landscapes populated by creatures that had evolved in isolation, developing forms and behaviors perfectly adapted to environments humans could barely imagine. Here was complexity without consciousness, purpose without anxiety, meaning without the burden of self-awareness. Marcus found the imagery calming until the narrator began discussing how climate change was threatening these ecosystems, how human activity was altering ocean chemistry, how many species faced extinction within decades. Even this refuge from human concerns was contaminated by human consequences. There was no escaping the web of complicity, no corner of existence that remained untouched by the collective impact of billions of individuals making reasonable decisions that aggregated into unreasonable outcomes. He turned off the television and sat in silence, surrounded by the accumulated objects of his comfortable, meaningless life. Outside, his neighbors were presumably engaged in their own evening routines, their own strategies for managing the gap between expectation and reality. They shared walls, property lines, municipal services, yet he felt more isolated than if he'd been alone on a desert island. At least solitude would be honest. Chapter 5: The Weekend Project. Saturday morning brought the familiar challenge of unstructured time. Without the framework of employment to organize his hours, Marcus confronted the raw fact of existence. Here he was, conscious and capable, with approximately 16 waking hours to fill according to his own discretion. The freedom was terrifying. He stood in his kitchen, coffee mug in hand, watching his neighbors through the window. Jim Patterson was mowing his lawn with mechanical precision, creating perfect parallel lines in grass that would grow again within a week. Across the street, the Williams family was loading camping gear into their SUV, preparing for what appeared to be an elaborate expedition to sleep outdoors in a different location. These activities struck Marcus as simultaneously admirable and absurd. His neighbors had found ways to occupy their time that felt purposeful to them, that provided structure and satisfaction. Jim clearly took pride in his lawn maintenance, and the Williams family was creating memories through shared adventure. Yet from Marcus's perspective, both activities seemed like elaborate distractions from the fundamental question of why they were doing anything at all. The mowing would need to be repeated endlessly. The camping trip would end with a return to exactly the same circumstances they'd temporarily escaped. Neither activity created lasting change or addressed any meaningful problem. They were motion without progress, effort without accomplishment, time-filling exercises dressed up as purposeful action. But Marcus's judgment felt petty and cruel. Who was he to dismiss other people's sources of satisfaction? His neighbors weren't hurting anyone. They were making the best of their circumstances, finding pleasure and meaning in available activities. Their contentment was real, even if he couldn't access it himself. He decided to attempt his own weekend project, something that might bridge the gap between activity and purpose. His home office contained a half-finished personal coding project, an application designed to optimize household energy consumption. The idea had seemed promising when he'd started it 3 months earlier: create a system that would automatically adjust heating, cooling, and lighting based on occupancy patterns and external conditions. Marcus opened his laptop and reviewed the existing code. The basic framework was solid, but significant work remained. He could spend the weekend adding features, refining algorithms, moving closer to a functional prototype. This felt more meaningful than lawn care or recreational camping. At least he was creating something new, solving actual problems, applying his skills toward practical improvement. But as he began coding, the familiar questions arose. Why optimize energy consumption in a single household when the real problems were systemic? Individual efficiency improvements were negligible compared to the waste embedded in power generation, distribution, and consumption patterns at industrial scales. His application might save a few dollars per month on utility bills while the fundamental structures of energy production remained unchanged. Moreover, who would benefit from such an application? People wealthy enough to own homes with automated systems, people like himself who could afford smart thermostats and programmable lighting. The technology would widen the gap between those with access to efficiency improvements and those without. He was creating a solution that would primarily serve people who least needed additional advantages. Yet the alternative was to do nothing, and doing nothing felt like its own form of moral failure. At least coding provided the illusion of progress, the satisfaction of problems solved and systems improved. Even if the improvements were marginal, they were real. Even if the beneficiaries were privileged, they were actual people who might experience genuine benefits. Marcus worked for several hours, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of problem-solving. Code compilation, testing, debugging, refinement, each step brought the application closer to functionality. He implemented a machine learning algorithm that would adapt to user behavior patterns, automatically optimizing settings based on accumulated data. The elegance of the solution provided genuine satisfaction. But satisfaction about what? He was teaching a computer to make minor adjustments to environmental controls, changes that would be imperceptible to users and insignificant in their broader impact. The coding was intellectually stimulating, but the result would be a slightly more efficient method of maintaining indoor comfort for people who were already comfortable. By afternoon, Marcus's concentration was fracturing. Each line of code he wrote felt simultaneously necessary and pointless, skilled and trivial, creative and mechanistic. He was caught in the same trap that characterized his professional work: technical competence applied to questionable ends, problem-solving skills directed toward problems that might not be worth solving. He saved his progress and closed the laptop, another weekend project destined to remain unfinished. His home office was littered with similar abandoned efforts, half-written articles, partially completed online courses, begun but not finished attempts to learn new programming languages, or develop new skills. Each had started with genuine enthusiasm, a sense that this time might be different, this project might provide the satisfaction that had eluded previous efforts. The pattern was clear but not actionable. Marcus could see that he repeatedly began projects that promised meaning but failed to deliver it. He could analyze his motivation, recognize the cycle, predict the outcome. But this understanding didn't enable him to break free from the pattern or find projects that would genuinely satisfy him. Knowledge of his condition didn't constitute a cure. He walked to his backyard, a quarter-acre of grass surrounded by a wooden fence, and sat on his deck. The space was pleasant enough, mature trees providing shade, flower beds maintained by a landscaping service, a small garden where he'd attempted to grow vegetables before losing interest. It was the outdoor living space featured in home improvement magazines, the suburban ideal of private natural refuge. But refuge from what? Marcus was hiding from nothing more threatening than his own thoughts, his own inability to find significance in available activities. The backyard was a stage set for contentment, equipped with all the props, but lacking the essential element: a person capable of being content. His phone buzzed with a text message from his sister Sarah, who lived across the country with her husband and 2 children. A photo of his nephew playing soccer, accompanied by the message, "Jake scored 2 goals today." The exclamation point suggested enthusiasm Marcus couldn't muster for his own achievements, let alone someone else's child's recreational activities. But he felt obligated to respond with matching enthusiasm, to participate in the family performance of mutual celebration. Fantastic. Tell him Uncle Marcus is proud of him. The lies came easily, reflexively. He wasn't proud. Pride required investment, caring about outcomes, belief that soccer goals mattered. But expressing his actual indifference would be cruel and inexplicable. This was perhaps the most exhausting aspect of his condition, the constant need to simulate emotions he didn't feel, to perform enthusiasm for things that struck him as meaningless, to participate in social rituals that felt hollow. The alternative was to withdraw entirely, but isolation carried its own psychological costs. He was trapped between authentic loneliness and an authentic connection. Chapter 6: The Sunday Drive. Sunday afternoon found Marcus in his car with no destination, driving the suburban streets of his city with the vague hope that motion might provide clarity. He passed shopping centers, chain restaurants, housing developments, office parks, the familiar landscape of American prosperity, clean and organized and profoundly dispiriting. Every structure seemed to embody the same principle: take basic human needs and transform them into commercial opportunities. People required food, so create restaurants that served industrially produced meals at premium prices. People needed shelter, so build developments that maximized profit per square foot. People wanted entertainment, so construct shopping centers that transformed leisure time into consumption opportunities. The efficiency was remarkable. Every potential desire had been identified, packaged, and monetized. Every space was optimized for some form of commerce. Even the parks and public areas were designed to channel people toward spending opportunities. The entire built environment seemed calibrated to extract money from citizens in exchange for the basics of existence. Marcus found himself at a large shopping mall, a monument to the conversion of human needs into profit opportunities. He parked and walked inside, joining the weekend flow of families and couples engaged in recreational purchasing. The scene was simultaneously cheerful and dystopian, people moving between stores with apparent purpose, examining products they didn't need, making decisions about purchases that would provide temporary satisfaction. Children dragged parents toward toy stores, their desires expertly cultivated by marketing campaigns designed by teams of psychologists. Teenagers clustered around electronics displays, comparing features of devices that would be obsolete within 2 years. Adults browsed clothing racks, seeking garments that would express their personality through mass-produced fashion choices. Everyone seemed to know their role in this elaborate performance. The shoppers knew to desire things they saw, the employees knew to facilitate these desires, the managers knew to optimize the entire process for maximum revenue generation. The system functioned smoothly because everyone participated willingly, even enthusiastically. But what was the point? Marcus watched a family debate the merits of different televisions, weighing picture quality against price, considering features they would rarely use. The television they eventually selected would occupy a prominent place in their home, providing entertainment that would help them forget about their need for entertainment. They would watch other people living fictional lives more interesting than their own, consuming stories that provided vicarious satisfaction, while their own story remained unwritten. He wandered through the mall, observing the intricate choreography of commerce. Every detail was designed to encourage spending, the lighting that made skin look healthy, the music that created emotional associations, the layout that maximized exposure to tempting displays. Millions of dollars had been invested in understanding human psychology for the purpose of manipulating human behavior. And it worked. People bought things they hadn't intended to buy, spent money they couldn't afford, accumulated objects they didn't need. The mall was full of families carrying shopping bags, testimony to successful persuasion campaigns. They seemed happy enough, satisfied with their purchases, pleased to participate in the weekend ritual of acquisition. Marcus felt like an anthropologist observing an alien culture, except he was supposed to be a native. This was his society, his economy, his way of life. He was supposed to find satisfaction in the same activities that pleased his neighbors. The fact that he couldn't access this satisfaction suggested some fundamental defect in his psychology, some inability to appreciate the life he'd been given. He left the mall without purchasing anything and continued driving, searching for something he couldn't name. The suburbs gave way to countryside, then to other suburbs indistinguishable from his own. Every town featured the same chain stores, the same architectural styles, the same organizing principles. The landscape had been rationalized, optimized, made efficient and profitable, and utterly homogeneous. Marcus stopped at a gas station to buy coffee and found himself in conversation with the clerk, a man perhaps 60 years old with calloused hands and a weather-beaten face. They discussed the weather, the weekend traffic, the local baseball team's prospects for the season. The conversation was pleasant, meaningless, reassuring in its banality. But Marcus noticed something in the clerk's demeanor, a quality of presence, of being fully engaged with the moment despite its apparent insignificance. The man wasn't performing customer service, he was genuinely interested in their brief interaction. He seemed content with his role, satisfied with his circumstances, unburdened by questions about cosmic significance. How did one achieve such simplicity? Marcus envied the clerk's apparent acceptance. his ability to find adequate meaning in immediate circumstances. Here was someone who had likely faced real hardships, made difficult compromises, accepted limitations that Marcus couldn't tolerate. Yet he seemed more genuinely content than Marcus had ever felt. The drive home took him through neighborhoods where he'd never lived, but that looked exactly like neighborhoods where he had lived. The same trees, lawns, mailboxes, garage doors. Occasionally he glimpsed people in their yards, their windows, their driveways, brief snapshots of other lives that appeared to be functioning normally. What were their internal experiences? Did they wrestle with questions about meaning and purpose? Or had they found ways to be satisfied with surface-level existence? Were they happy, content, fulfilled, or were they all secretly experiencing the same displacement Marcus felt? There was no way to know, no acceptable method of inquiry, no socially appropriate conversation that would reveal whether his condition was unique or universal. Marcus arrived home as evening was beginning, having spent hours in motion without arriving anywhere meaningful. The drive had been simultaneously necessary and pointless, an attempt to escape thoughts that traveled with him wherever he went. He was no closer to resolution, but at least he had occupied several hours without causing harm to himself or others. This seemed to constitute success, of a sort. Chapter 7: The Monday Morning Revelation. Marcus woke before his alarm, consciousness arriving with the unwelcome clarity that sometimes accompanies a night of fitful sleep. He lay in bed watching morning light filter through curtains, postponing the moment when he would need to begin another day's performance of normalcy. The weekend's explorations had left him feeling more displaced rather than less. His attempts to find meaningful activity had only highlighted the arbitrary nature of all activities. Coding, driving, observing, each had provided temporary distraction without addressing the underlying problem of his existence in a world that felt fundamentally incoherent. But as he prepared for work, executing his morning rituals with mechanical precision, Marcus experienced something approaching an epiphany. Not a solution, but a recognition. He had been searching for activities that would provide meaning, relationships that would offer connection, achievements that would justify his existence. He had been treating his condition as a problem to be solved rather than a perspective to be understood. What if meaninglessness wasn't a personal failing, but an accurate perception of reality? What if his inability to find satisfaction in conventional activities wasn't a psychological defect, but a clear view of their actual nature? What if his sense of displacement wasn't something to be cured, but something to be accepted as the natural consequence of seeing clearly? This possibility was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it suggested he wasn't broken, wasn't failing at some essential life skill that everyone else had mastered. Terrifying because it implied that meaning, purpose, and satisfaction might be collective illusions that he was unable or unwilling to share. If this were true, then his options became clearer. He could continue trying to force himself into systems that felt hollow, attempting to manufacture enthusiasm for activities that struck him as pointless. Or he could accept his perception as valid and find ways to live authentically within the constraints of a meaningless universe. But authentic living in a meaningless universe presented its own challenges. If nothing ultimately mattered, then his comfort was as significant as his misery, his actions as consequential as his inaction. The logic of meaninglessness suggested that he might as well choose comfort, convenience, and conventional success, since these were as valid as any alternatives. Yet this conclusion felt like another form of surrender, a capitulation to systems he found objectionable simply because resistance required effort he couldn't justify. If he was going to accept meaninglessness, shouldn't he at least accept it honestly, without the pretense of finding satisfaction in arbitrary pursuits. Marcus arrived at work with these thoughts churning in his mind, creating a strange sense of detachment from his usual anxiety. If his job was meaningless, then his performance of it was also meaningless, which paradoxically made the performance easier. He could optimize supply chain algorithms without worrying about whether supply chains should be optimized. He could contribute to corporate efficiency without needing to believe that corporate efficiency was inherently valuable. This detachment proved remarkably functional. Marcus found himself more effective rather than less, able to focus on technical problems without being distracted by questions about their ultimate significance. He completed tasks that had been lingering on his to-do list, responded to emails that had been acum.